Man, I had an incredible day yesterday. I got to test out this Huawei 34-inch widescreen monitor called the MateView GT and play all kinds of games on it. Now, I've had this thing for about a month now, and I actually have been using it as an edit monitor. I've had my MacBook Pro, my new M1 Pro chip MacBook Pro, plugged into this thing, and I've been editing all kinds of stuff, primarily the Rocket and Raygun Awards, which I had to edit a whole bunch of material for, and it was a revelation as an editing tool because primarily I've been editing on things like an iMac, or before I had this monitor come in, I was editing on the smaller screen of the MacBook Pro, and I was contending with that just fine. But to have all of that real estate, to see the timeline before me, and to see all of the different tools that I had to use to be able to edit with, just incredible. I mean, it's so freaking good to go to this widescreen format that I am never going back. This is the way I'm going to edit from now on. So this device has proven itself as something very useful in my day-to-day job. But what I did yesterday was kind of sit back and play a bunch of things. You can see a little Cyberpunk 2077 running on this. This monitor is absolutely incredible. Let's get into the specs a little bit. So first of all, it's a 34-inch display diagonally, which has a curve in it, and it's qualified by 1500R. The aspect ratio is 21:9, and the screen resolution is 3440 by 1440. So it's not quite 4K resolution, but it's really, really crisp. It has fantastic color accuracy. Huawei says it's 90% DCI P3, and I don't have the tools to assess all of that, but I can tell you that the color clarity and the quality was absolutely incredible in the games that I played. There are 1.07 billion colors that this thing can display. The contrast ratio is 4,000 to 1. The brightness is 350 nits, so you can find monitors out there, particularly gaming monitors, that can get quite a bit brighter. And because it doesn't get super bright, the HDR is a little bit more difficult to notice, although when I played Doom Eternal, the bright flashes of my gunfire and everything looked exhilarating on this machine. It also has a 165 hertz display. Also, interestingly, the MateView GT has a sound bar built right in, which is represented by the little colored bar that you can see right behind me here, this thing right there. It's actually touch sensitive, so you can actually adjust the volume by sliding on that colored bar there, which is pretty cool. And the audio quality is actually pretty decent. The thing that I discovered, though, when I had this plugged into my MacBook Pro is that the speakers on the new MacBook Pros are incredible, like really, really amazing. I mean, I stack it up to the 2016 iMac, and it sounds better on my laptop, which just blows me away. And yes, the sound off of the laptop, especially while I was editing, was much better than the sound bar on this thing. But when I plugged in my PC and just played games on it, I was really impressed. Like, the clarity is pretty solid, and it is, you know, kind of like an add-on, I think, in the grand scheme of things. It's built right into the base, so it comes included with it. And you'll probably, you know, when you get a screen this big, you'll probably invest in some pretty killer speakers and some great headphones. But the soundbar works in a pinch, and you can still have a really enjoyable gaming experience for sure. It's got some pretty solid volume and some pretty solid clarity. But again, I've been more impressed by the speakers coming out of my laptop, which is just kind of crazy for me. Now, in terms of testing this monitor out as a game playing device, I wanted to throw all kinds of stuff at it. I wanted to see stuff running at 21:9 and at the highest frame rate that I could achieve on this device. So I tested out the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X, and I plugged in a couple of different PCs just to see the kinds of frame rates that I was getting and how the games would handle and how they would feel in widescreen. And I can tell you, widescreen gaming, and I'm new to this, you know, I've never reviewed a widescreen gaming monitor. I don't have tons and tons of experience with this stuff, so this is all new for me to edit on something like this, but also to play games on this. It's pretty damn incredible, especially when you play games like Star Wars Squadrons, which, you know, puts you into a cockpit, and if you play the game on a flat screen 16:9 display, you kind of feel a little hemmed in, particularly if you go from the VR mode that Star Wars Squadrons offers to the traditional television kind of scale. But when you're in widescreen and it's kind of curved around, you definitely can feel the edges of the windows on your X-Wing, and you can look out, and it just feels more enveloping, and I was really appreciative of that. I also was really impressed popping on Cyberpunk 2077. I had this running on the Alienware Aurora R12 that I have, so I had all the ray tracing cranked. It has a 3070 card in it, and everything was just running flawlessly. And all of the cool kind of computer-esque elements that are a part of this beautiful, beautiful game. Every time I dive into Cyberpunk, I become more and more entranced by it. So that was a huge success. The same goes to Doom Eternal, running in widescreen at 100 frames per second with all the HDR blooming and lighting and the speed and the ferocity of that game. Absolutely stunning and gorgeous. Now, I couldn't figure out how to get more than 100 frames per second on my computer. I went to the system settings and the display settings in the front end and into each of the games, and it would just auto default to 100 frames per second, and I think it has something to do with the detection that is going through the HDMI connections. Now, when I connected to the monitor with a DisplayPort cable, I was able to get 165 frames per second on PC games, and I did get 120 frames per second on the Xbox Series X, but it had to scale down to 1080p. And again, I searched all over the internet to figure out what the hell I had to kind of configure to fix this. I wanted to run at 1440p at 120 frames per second on the Series X, and it never would do that. It would only go to 1080p at 120 frames per second, and only by overriding the detection that the Xbox Series X has for the display that it's connected to. So I had to kind of dig into the menus there, override everything, and kind of set things the way that I wanted them, but then it defaulted back down to 1080p, which was discouraging. And on the PlayStation 5, I never could get it running at 120 hertz per second. There was no way to override the detection. And that all speaks to the fact that the monitor has HDMI 2.0 inputs. It doesn't have HDMI 2.1 inputs, and I think that's a little bit of a misstep with this monitor. Now, this is Huawei's first gaming monitor. This is their first kick at it. And it's incredible what they have achieved here. You know, my point of reference isn't like I've tasted a whole bunch of widescreen curved monitors in the past. All I can tell you is going from a 16:9 OLED display, so I'm pretty spoiled as it is. I have, good tech around me, and I get to play these games with really impressive visuals already. But going from that to this, I was still unbelievably impressed by the fidelity and the quality and the experience. And, upping the frame rate makes everything much more smooth. Playing something like Ori and the Will of the Wisps at 120 frames per second, even if it popped down to 1080p, it still looked absolutely incredible on this device. And again, I played Red Dead Redemption 2 on the PC in widescreen, running in the highest fidelity, and it was beautiful and enveloping and mesmerizing to look at. Same with Death Stranding and Horizon Zero Dawn, Star Wars Squadrons I mentioned already. I went through a cascade of some of my favorite PC gaming experiences. I tested out a little bit of Halo Infinite at 120 frames per second, just the kind of the 16:9 core 1080p output that I was getting on the Xbox Series X, and it all looked great. So yes, I'm really impressed by the Huawei MateView GT. It's a stunner. It proved itself as a worthwhile addition to my desk, just as something to use in post-production and as an editing tool, but then to kind of realize that I could plug in a gaming PC and an additional HDMI port, because there's two HDMI ports plus a display port, so you can actually have a bunch of different devices plugged in there. And to have the luxury of just being able to sit back and be enveloped by the beautiful output. And yes, this isn't an OLED display, it's a regular LCD monitor, and you can see it doesn't have the blackest blacks that you might get out of an OLED screen, but you're not paying that premium price either. What's impressive about this is that all the technology that this thing provides, the multiple inputs, runs off of USB-C power. There's a microphone built into it, which is kind of like standard webcam microphone fare. The sound bar with the touch interface and the RGB colors that you can attach to them, so you can have this kind of funky rainbow effect if you would like. And just being enveloped by that wide screen, you can pick it up for about $750 Canadian, which probably means it's around $600 in the States right now, or $650 in the States. This thing was also a breeze to set up as well. It's got a magnetic kind of clip on the back of it. The monitor can actually go up and down, so you can kind of scale it. You can also tilt it to where you want it for your eye placement. It's heavy, but it's solid, it's really well made. And man, it's a lot of fun to be able to work across that wide screen, but also to play across that wide screen. I'm a fan. The Huawei MateView GT, I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10.